Hello, everyone. I'm Shruti Kumtekar, Marketing Manager at Kloves. Thank you for joining us in our monthly webinar today. We're excited to present to you about our CSM implementation with Aprimo. Here's our agenda. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to go through housekeeping, talk a little about Kloves, who we are, followed by a presentation in collaboration with Aprimo on their CSM journey, and finally the Q&A. This webinar will be recorded, so if you miss something, you will be able to access it later. As I mentioned, the Q&A session is towards the end of the webinar, and you're on mute. If you have any questions, please use the questions or comments section in your GoToWebinar control panel. I will read them out for our panelists. If you have any questions that are not directly related to this webinar, please email me at shruti@klovesinc.com or sales@klovesinc.com. Our social media channels are listed here, and you can access our previous webinars at our Kloves YouTube channel. About Kloves, we are a ServiceNow partner since 2011. We're based out of Santa Clara, very close to the ServiceNow headquarters. We are a full ServiceNow shop with 150 plus customers and close to 50 consultants, and we've been executing projects globally. We provide end-to-end services. Our focus this year has been on customer service management, end user portals, and mostly HR under enterprise service management. Our panelists today are Matthew Zagoraris from Aprimo and Madhu Banerjee from Kloves. Matthew, we are very excited to have you join us today and present your ServiceNow CSM journey. Thank you, and I'm going to pass control to you now.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Just give me a sec while I switch the screens and set up my screen here. Okay, I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Again, thank you. My name is Matt Zagoraris. I'm partnering with Madhu. She was my partner at Kloves. And what we'd like to talk to you guys about today is our deployment. Specifically, I'd like to talk, we're going to cover the objectives, the scope, and the timeline of what we did, some of the business benefits, the architecture, some of the architecture of the design and development that we implemented. And then Madhu will take over the presentation and talk about the implementation approach, and we'll be willing to stay on and ask some answer some of your questions. I'll put this slide up here for a minute, and I'll just give you the backstory. Starting 2016, 2017, we acquired 3 companies. And each of these companies had different physical locations and different time zones, and obviously different staff and product lines. And what we needed to do is consolidate everything onto one platform so that we could consolidate our customer, our operations. And we chose to do that on the ServiceNow CSM application. And we had 12 weeks to do all of this. What all this involved was transferring the portals, writing up some customized code to support the partners we acquired, moving all the knowledge and community, doing all the data transformation and data moves for historical purposes, modifying some analyst views, and so basically taking the normal IT functions of each of the companies and moving them onto the core Aprimo ServiceNow platform. In addition to that, we had to create the ability to log and track enhancements for our own Aprimo customers. So now they can go to the platform, the portal, and log in the request for an enhancement on any of our core products. And we now have the ability to track that and manage it through its entire lifecycle. We also did some enhancements to some interfaces with our to support that functionality and other level 4 operations. So the business value to all of this was to consolidate our systems, allowed us to take advantage of cross-training of our agents across all our product lines, allow us to share capacity seamlessly across centers, extend our hours of operation into multiple time zones, eliminate manual data transfers to our legacy systems, and simplify our interactions with engineering and product management. From a customer standpoint, what it did is provided a single point of entry. We simplified a lot of the forms as compared to the legacy inputs that they were using. In some cases, up to 80%. I'll talk more about that later. And we provided a seamless transition to ServiceNow from the legacy systems, with a large kudos and help from Madhu and the Kloves team. So let me talk about our partnership with Kloves a little bit. So even before we engaged Kloves, we worked hard to detail all the requirements and understand the business models of the acquired companies, where they were now and where we intend them to be a year from now or 2 years from now. That way we try to move to and develop the end state as much as possible, building that flexibility into the design and understand the business requirements from ours, theirs, and theirs, ours, to kind of bring us all together. Having done that and looking at the timeline, the complexity of what we needed to do, and the timeline in which we needed to do it, it became very obvious that we needed to have multiple tracks of development, kicked off simultaneously. When we approached Kloves, they were willing and able to staff to those kinds of levels, and they provided us some extremely skilled and professional people who added real value to the development and deployment, and really helped manage everything, including the implementation. So what this did is really allowed me to focus on the organization, help manage the organization, and manage the user side, from my standpoint, we gave the requirements. We did a little back and forth with the Kloves team, and after that, it was developed, and I had a concept, I had development, and I had an implementation plan. One of the ways that we try to manage the requirements right off the top is to kind of use this RASCI matrix. If you haven't heard of it before, it's a Six Sigma tool I pulled out of my toolkit, and what it does is it helps me organize my users into those who are responsible, who have the authority, who's going to support, who kind of needs to know. So what I did with this is I took each of the functional areas I knew would change, and I brought the parties together, and I was able to pick my SMEs and the people who needed to know, and the people who would approve the changes, and so forth. And it gave me a map of how to staff my project plan and how to communicate who and how to communicate to, given the levels of interest in each of the areas. Once we got the organization kind of sorted out and organized, we went on to more of an architecture stream. In this, pardon me. In this case, in this example here, what we've done, we're mapping out the portal. So, for example, up here we have situations where one of our acquired companies had a partner provide level 1, 2 support. Those partners had a range of customers assigned to them, and those customers had a range of products that they purchased. versus the Aprimo core business, we deal more directly to end customers, one-to-one, and obviously with the range of products that they have. A really unusual case, at least for me, was one of our companies had a model where they sold their product to an end customer, and those customers had partners globally, and we didn't know how they would change or when they would change. So what we decided to do is create an open portal so that those partners could then come to us for support on our product. And we capture a certain amount of information, and which allows us to understand who they're supporting and route each of the cases to the right place. Another challenge that we faced was the whole community knowledge aspect. Each of the companies, including Aprimo, had their own knowledge and community and a location for customers to search. So now we ended up with 4. Kloves figured out a way, and this actually was a very heavy lift, to grab the knowledge, including the attachments in there, the community history, and move it all and create spaces inside ServiceNow. And so basically we consolidated everything, brought everything into ServiceNow, and we have one repository where we go to for everything. So if we hadn't done that, you can just think that customers down the road would acquire products, from any one of the 4 former companies, standalone companies, or the roadmap would change on a given product, and then the impact that would have on the back end to manage that administration. So it was a heavy lift, but I think it was well worth the effort in avoiding some future headaches. And from a customer perspective as well, it really helps simplify and make things a lot easier for the customer. The other thing we kind of did is, if you recall the RASCI matrix a couple slides back, each of those themes with the SMEs and all the associate individuals who are involved in a particular theme, I brought into here and I broke it down even further. So each of those themes ties to a tactical issue on the screen, and for some areas we decided to take the parent company's process. In other areas we decided to change it and develop it. In the areas where we made no change, it was a matter of teaching, communicating this is how it's done. In other areas where we decided to change something, it was, okay, how should we change it, and let everybody know what's going to change, right? The other thing this kind of did for me is kind of showed everybody the extent of the work that we needed to do, and where we were in that process. And down at the bottom here, what I did is I created some volume indicators, so number of customers, number of cases, installs, and so forth. And the idea here was, tell me how much throughput I've got in each of these areas. And because that would drive probably the level of complexity, the level of automation, and and the level of effort we would need to put in to the data migration and so forth. So in one case, we didn't migrate any history. We just moved everything over manually and left it at that. But in a couple of the other cases, we wrote script and automated a whole lot of things. The last area that I thought that was a real important to the success of our 12-week mission was data simplification. So we went through. So what you're seeing on the screen essentially is a way to catalog what kind of problem occurs based on the case that's received. And in some cases, you could have a tree 4 or 5 branches deep. So what we did is kind of challenge that and said, what's the business value to that endpoint? Are we using it anywhere? And in a lot of cases, there wasn't an endpoint. It was just the agent collecting the data, and that's as far as it went. So that was an opportunity to simplify the agent's process and the customer's process, because from a portal standpoint, the customer would have to fill all this stuff in. So we improved the productivity, improved the quality of life, I would argue, for the agent and the customer in this respect. And the outcome of that was, it made development and data transfer a whole lot easier. And now I'd like to turn it over to Madhu, who's going to talk about the implementation approach.
Thank you, Matthew, for covering the first slides, and it was very informative. Before I start, I'd like to thank you for being such a great support for the Kloves team and having trust in us. And that's the only reason we could deliver in such a small period of time, because you trusted us and you openly communicated with us, and we appreciate it. So thank you very much. With that, I'd like to cover different phases we went through. So in a nutshell, it was a very iterative process. So we followed Agile as well as the waterfall combined kind of a methodology for this project, because it could not work for either or. So we had to basically marry both of the methodology for a successful project and delivery. So I'll start with the requirement review and design. As you have seen, Matthew had done a lot of work beforehand and talk to the stakeholders and get them on the same page. So that was very helpful for us. So we could just start with understanding the requirement and pointing out if anything which was not basically articulated. And we did have daily meetings in order to uncover requirements and understand and restate the requirements. That's what our understanding, so that Matthew could say, yep, that's what it is. And then we moved on from there. And we did that for each requirement. So one of the challenges we faced in the requirement phase itself was that we had to normalize the product data, because there was a data which different team called it in a different way, and we could actually complicate the whole process if we did a separate thing for each team. So we wanted to just have one portal and one way of doing things for each team. So we spent some time going back and forth in order to normalize the data so that it looked simple on the portal. Design and mock-up screens were very helpful in this project, because we could state understanding of the requirement in a real mock-up screen so that they could see how it will look like. And then once they approved it and they said, yep, that's how it looks like, we moved on with the development. Otherwise, it would have wasted a lot of time. We coded it, and then it wasn't exactly to their expectations. So I think having mock-ups, was a very helpful in this project. And it could upfront make stakeholders a little comfortable that at the end of the project, they're going to get the screens they're looking for. So with that requirement and review and design phase, we were very confident that we can deliver what was asked for. And we proceeded with the configuration, code, test, and deployment. One thing I like to point out is that our philosophy on the project had been that we want to make it as configurable as possible. So coding was done only when it was needed and it was a valid business case. We pushed back on some of the customization just to make it simple for the maintenance in the future. because the more coding we do, more complex we make it, it's harder to maintain in the future. So that was our philosophy in implementation. What we did with the deployment is we made it a staggered release. Rather than doing all the products at the same time, we picked some products. I said, okay, let's do it with this, let's pilot it. So it was a pilot-based approach. And we had some partners on that pilot through, even in the UAT phase, so that they could give their early feedback. So that was very helpful for us to get the early feedback from the real partners of Aprimo. And the features also, we didn't do the big bang that let's give them everything together. So we did the basically we said, okay, let's get the main features first, and we will do the enhancement in the next release. And also what we did is that we did the customers of one product, onboarded them first, and then rest of the partners and customers in the second batch. The last but not the least was the data import. So like Matthew mentioned earlier, we had 3 different systems where we needed to get the data from. And it was a humongous task. Because in some of the cases, we could use API, which made it a little simpler for us to get the data. In some cases, we had to do manual export and imports. And there were cases where even that didn't work, and we did have to do manual data entry. But most of the heavy lifting was done through APIs. And that's the only reason we could do such a accelerated timeline. And I would like to thank our Kloves team for doing a great work in that area, because combining 3-4 systems into one system is not an easy job. So we can go to the next slide, Matthew. So next slide, I'd like to point out when we started the development, the challenges we started with, and what the outcomes we were looking for. So 3 different CSM tools and processes, mixed product types. So there were certain products which were on-premise install project, and there are few products which were the SaaS products. And as you know, the data associated with both products can be different. So we had to make one screen work for both of them. We didn't want customers to have inconsistent customer experience. And because that kind of is a little bit annoying, like if you're a customer and we are dealing with one company and we have for different products, we had to go to the different screen, didn't make sense. So we opted for basically creating a one screen for them. And there was another issue was that if we want a standard reporting to the leadership, because if each team is reporting in a different format and different metrics, it can be challenging for the leadership to compare. And one of the last challenges was also that product development team uses a different tool to track their defects and enhancements. So there was an issue to get a visibility into where they are with their defects and enhancement progress. So with these challenges, the outcomes we were looking for was just one Aprimo customer portal for all their products, simple. Standard support process, which works for all the associated team. Like Matthew mentioned in the previous slide, is that now they can use the agents to support different products because it's the same support process. Product-based routing, that was very important because depending on which team is responsible for which products, it automatically routed it to that team. And also entitlement and SLAs, we implemented based on the partners, what their entitlement was and what their contractual agreement with Aprimo was. And other outcome we were looking for is that we have a standard reports and dashboard for all the team concerned. Matthew, can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is Next few slides will be basically sharing what we were able to do and what was the product after it was done. So this was the open portal which was available to the public, and use case was described by Matthew earlier. So here, very simple. This person is not in the system, so they have to provide all their information here. And we did want to make sure that people don't flood the system, because whenever you have an open portal, it's you can have a risk of getting flooded by someone. So we had to have that I'm not a robot kind of a thing there, so that it cannot be done. And also we took precautions in the back end to avoid that. But it was one of the very important requirements which Aprimo had. Next slide. So case creation for multiple products. Like it's mentioned before, this was a very important that we have a one form for each product. So as the product was selected, the different fields will show and hide. So it was look and feel for each product is the same. Once the customer gets into the system, we already know which customer he is because he's logged in at this point. And once he's logged in, we know which products he has bought. So which product he will be seeking support with. So we will only mention those site IDs, which products he's entitled to. And then all he has to do is select the priority, provide some information, and the case will be submitted and will go to the right queue. Next slide. So this is the enhancement. Before, we didn't have a separate enhancement form because enhancement is a lot simpler form than the product, because you need some product data. In this case, we wanted to capture a different kind of information. So we wanted to say, okay, which product you are requesting the enhancement for, and what is your concept, and why you're asking for. So please provide us some business use case for this so that we can understand it. And as soon as this enhancement is created, work is assigned to the product development team automatically. So that was a big help for the integrating with the product development team directly with the customer support system. Case view, this is basically, if you see on the top, you can see cases and enhancements to menu items separately. So we wanted users not to go and basically sort them. So it will have a relevant data for enhancement and cases. So we created two menu items for that. So it's a list view of cases where you can see where your priorities and which state you are and who updated it the last. So this provide the customers only their cases, what they have created and what states they are in. And just to cover the backend a little bit, what the analyst view will look like. So it's very simple, you can see. It has basically customer information, contact information, site ID, and the product. So main key item here is the product. As soon as you click on the product, it will know automatically what entitlement, what assignment group, and which team it should go to. All that is automatically filled in. Subcategories we introduced to just cover, like functionality issue is the category of this, but it could be related with certain part of the system. So we wanted to give that granularity into the reporting so that all the cases are coming into which subcategory. So that will give you, if it was translation related, like in this example I'm giving, it will give you all the issues which were reported in that area. So this next slide is very busy slide. So this is kind of summarizes all the implementation practices which we found very useful during this project. As you know, this project was a very complex project, and when we started, it looked very challenging. But by the time we were done, it seemed like, oh, it was a very simple project. But I think the reason was because we were able to use good implementation practices, and we wanted to share with our audience what really helped us getting this project to the successful ending. So Matthew, with that, will you like to share something about this slide?
No, I think you covered very, very well. We just, these are some of the things that we thought you guys would find interesting, and that, you know, in retrospect, really worked out well for us, whether we planned it out or not. We try to plan out and think ahead as much as possible, but, you know, hindsight is always a little bit clearer. So, you know, we just thought we'd pass things on to you.
Thank you, Matthew. And again, I would like to thank Matthew for his great support throughout this project. He was always on the ball, how he interacted with Kloves team and with the Aprimo team. I think this, I give a lot of credit for his upfront work he did for Aprimo, so that, you know, we could really hit the road with the good requirements and continuous support, his project management skills. So it was pleasure, Matthew, working with you on this project. And with that, I think we can open up for some questions. If you have any ending comments, Matthew?
I just want to reciprocate. It was really a pleasure working with you and your team, and I hope I get to do it again soon. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
So attendees, if you have any questions, you can use the questions section in your GoToWebinar panel, and I will read them out for our panelists to answer. Okay, so I have a question here. So they ask, how was the support you received from ServiceNow?
Pretty good. I think there were a couple of cases where there was one case where we had to create something in I think some custom code. I don't recall the situation exactly, what specifically was about, but we looked at it and we said, you know what, let's open a ticket and request to go to product management so that they can review it, just so we can make sure that we're not off the reservation here. And I requested that it be a high priority. It was treated as such, and we got the appropriate feedback back. And you know, we adjusted our path accordingly. I think those kinds of special requests, when they're executed, really help delight me as a customer and help me be successful with something very complicated and difficult such as this. Madhu, do you want to add anything?
No, I think I'll just like to ditto that, because I think throughout the process, ServiceNow team had been very helpful in wherever we are stuck, or if we needed a second opinion, they were there to help us.
Yeah, and I mean, outside this project as well, I work closely with our customer support team, and they really go out of the way to help me maximize the use of the product. So I'm pretty happy with the support I've gotten.
Okay, great. Let's see, we have another question here. Are there one or two key metrics that you are tracking as proofs of your implementation success down your journey?
Implementation success is pretty hard to kind of measure. What I can do in terms of product, designing the product itself or designing the screen, is count out how many clicks I had before versus after. how many handoffs I had before versus after. In terms of implementation, I can count, how many complaints have I gotten, how many escalations I've gotten. Because if it works, no one says anything. If it doesn't work, then you start hearing a lot of noise. And it's pretty hard to get any other kind of positive feedback. I'm happy to say that we haven't had a single escalation. I don't know how many weeks it's been since we've deployed, but it's been a long time. We have had some good feedback, unforced, comments sort of thing, and I've had no escalations at all. So the implementation went very well, and the design looked good. We've gotten some good feedback from not statistically valid feedback, but something that would lead me to believe that things went well. I know I didn't answer your question directly, but that's all I got.
Okay. Another question from one of our attendees: what would you do differently?
Probably not agree to a 12-week deployment for something this size. That was a little tongue-in-cheek, but what would I do differently? I think at some point I tried, seriously, the time aspect and the way the all the endpoints came together. I think at one point I just, the amount of data and interactions and tasks to keep up just became overwhelming. And those are the kinds of things you don't necessarily see on paper, but they sort of creep up on you because a whole lot of other things that are unanticipated happen. And then it just becomes overwhelming. So if I had to do it again, I kind of space those out a little bit more and give myself a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more capacity to be able to handle the unexpected.
Okay, great. Another question here. Did you do any integration with the defect tracking system and any plans in that area?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite, the audio cut out there for a minute. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, no problem. Did you do any integration with the defect tracking system and any plans in that area?
Defect tracking, I'm going to assume those that means items that are escalated into level 4 into engineering and product management. We did do that. We created a REST API to grab data and move it to the system that our level 4 team uses, and back and forth. So that was one of the key things that we enhanced and developed in this go around as well. For example, I know this is a little different from your question, but the enhancement functionality, can be logged in as an enhancement, in which case it goes to product management. However, it can be logged in as a bug, which could escalate to engineering, be identified as an enhancement, and then move around, right? So we had to understand how that process worked, get an agreement on how that process would work, and be able and manage it through the interface and each of the systems.
Okay.
Matthew, just to
I hope I
add
answered
to
your
that.
question. If I didn't, I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, please ask again.
So just to add to Matthew's explanation, we did have an integration with the system called VSTS, which is a Microsoft system used by Aprimo.
Okay. Well, there's a comment from one of the attendees, and he says, "Thank you for an excellent and very informative session."
My pleasure. You're welcome.
Okay, so I think those are all the questions that we have for now. And attendees, if you have any more questions, please email us at sales@closing.com or shruti@closing.com. And with that, thank you everyone for attending our webinar today. And thank you once again, Matthew and Madhu. It was a really great and informative session. And see you all, everybody, next month with our next close webinar.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.